Hello from Redmond. I'm Arden White, Principal Security Engineer at Microsoft, and I'm going to let my cohorts introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Scott Schell. I'm a Principal Software Architect in the Enterprise and Security Group in Windows, and spend a lot of time these days focusing on Secure Boot and helping you guys all get your machines up to date.
Yep, and hi, I'm Richard Powell. I'm a Group Engineering Manager for the Core Security team in Windows as well. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Okay, we already have our first question. What happens if you set the registry settings on a device that is still using legacy BIOS? Is the update process smart enough to ignore these devices?
So the answer is yes. If you're on literal legacy BIOS, then your machine is not Secure Boot capable. So it can't run Secure Boot. So it'll be Secure Boot. Well, the way it shows up in our system is Secure Boot capable, false, and Secure Boot enabled, false, which means we will not update anything. The updates only happen if the device is Secure Boot enabled. So even beyond being capable, which legacy BIOS is not. Now, the reason I bring that up is there are some devices that have what's called CSM, a compatibility mode in firmware that can still run some things from legacy BIOS, but do have Secure Boot and UEFI. And I believe that CSM will not cause us to fail the update, that updates can still be done if CSM is there. I'm fairly certain about that. I can double check and get back to you.
Okay, our next question. Our company does not allow us to use Intune. Are there any helpful tools or scripts to inventory? I have the Get Secure Boot, aka ready to show. Oh, there we go.
I think that was a note for you, Arden.
I'm reading the notes. So yes, be sure to look at aka.ms Get Secure Boot. And the question, there are scripts on the website, on the Get Secure Boot website for doing inventory. They're PowerShell scripts. You can find it in the IT Pro guidance section of that website. And there's a fairly elaborate script that we've been promoting.
Yeah, the other thing I would add is, we are obviously logging events, and you probably have some tool set for monitoring events on the devices in your corporate infrastructure. If it's not Intune, usually most companies are monitoring for events and can tell what events their devices are sending out. So on the Get Secure website, Get Secure Boot website, look at that section on those events and see if the software that you have will allow you to view them for your infrastructure.
Okay, so next question is, during the February AMA, you end-phased that enterprises should leverage Intune and build their own dashboard to monitor secure boot states. The guide requires enterprise licenses as an MSP that manage thousands of devices with business premium plan for multiple customers with Intune and Lighthouse. It doesn't make sense. Is there a plan to monitor these states via compliance policy instead? Also regarding the Secure Boot compliance policy that will happen to devices that will still have an old certificate, will they continue to show as compliant with the 2011 certificate? Wow, that's a long question.
So I'm going to admit that I don't know personally the Intune licenses. Richard, do you know that?
Yeah, I was about to say the same thing. This gets into Intune licensing, which unfortunately I'm not sure any of us will have the answer to, but we can definitely get the answer and post it later on. And then on the second part of the question, the devices that still have an old certificate, will they still continue to show compliant? I think that's also an Intune question.
Yeah, that's a question of what the policy is that you're trying to enforce. So there are multiple layers of policy you can enforce. The first and primary one that we care about is, are the new certificates deployed? Do you have the 2023 UEFI CA? Do you have the 2023 Microsoft CA? Do you have the 2023 KEK? If you have those certificates, we're happy, and our Secure Boot rollout is going well. The other thing we can mention before we get back with more details on the Intune side is the other tools like Arden and Richard were mentioning before, the PowerShell-based scripts and the event log-based reporting. And Richard, did you want to mention the other reporting plugins that we have for the other third-party things? What's that one called?
Yeah, I mean, it's not available yet, but AutoPatch is coming soon. And as soon as that's available, we will let everyone know on the Get Secure Boot website.
I thought the AutoPatch reports up there, isn't it? Or are you talking about later additions?
Their dashboard stuff, yeah.
Okay. Next question. Could you confirm that the Secure Boot Updates scheduled task expects Microsoft owner GUID on Microsoft signatures in Secure Boot? We customize the Secure Boot content, and it seems that a different GUID causes the task to break the behavior of get firmware environment variable A used by Bitlocker and other things. Could you also confirm that updating the firmware SVN, fourth step in the revocations, only consists in adding SVNs to the DBX, and that for testing purposes, resetting the DBX is enough to cancel the rollback prevention? So I don't know that I understand the owner GUID. Oh, I think I do. So that's the owner GUID in the firmware.
It's in the variable. So the way the Secure Boot variable data structure works, every entry in there has an owner GUID next to it. We definitely did initially at the beginning of the rollout have a check there. I believe we relaxed that check. But I don't know whether
Bitlocker we did. I know, yeah, because Bitlocker was accounting for that in the ceiling, and so I think we relaxed it for that.
So on the second step, the SVN, there are multiple things that prevent rollback. So the SVN is preventing rollback of the newer boot managers. So newer boot managers that that are signed with the 2023 certificate check their own revocation using SVN. So it will prevent rollback among those boot managers. Rollback to the 2011 boot manager, which is the thing that enables the real attack scenarios like Black Lotus, that requires having to be protected from that rollback requires having the 2011 certificate either removed or revoked with the DBX entry for that. So yes, for testing purposes, resetting DBX back to a state that doesn't have that SVN is enough to allow the older 2023 signed boot managers to run. I think I answered that question.
And I'll put in a plug for the PowerShell tools are getting updated this month and next month, including adding a Get Secure Boot SVN PowerShell that will easily show you what's in the firmware and what your boot manager SVN is. So it'll give you an easier way to figure out where you stand on a device. So next question, I think it was Scott that said in the December AMA, the 2011 KEK key can no longer be used to sign updates post-expiration. If a device hasn't received any updates, CA or KEK, by expiration, is it true that the device will first need to get the 2023 KEK installed and second install the 2023 KEK signed CA into the DB list before boot manager or any bootloader for that matter signed by the 2023 CA will boot? Is that the correct order of operations? I think it's so. if you get past the expiration date, you can still apply the certificates, the existing certificates, as is, because they're signed with the old the 2011 KEK. So it's really just about it's the same steps you would do right now that you would do after the certificates have expired. So there's no there's the order of operations doesn't change after the certificates expire. Okay, next question. If I ignore this and do nothing, will devices with or without Secure Boot enabled continue to boot?
Answer is
Devices
yes.
will continue to boot.
Yes.
So the primary problem of actually, that's a great plugin. The aka.ms/securebootfac FAQ is a great resource for that kind of question. But yes, absolutely, devices will continue to boot. The primary impact is that the devices will not be able to get all of the security updates. So some security updates require being able to update DBX, which revokes bad things that are signed with the Secure Boot certificates, and those revocations can't come down. And in some cases, if you don't have the 2023 DB certificate, we can't update Boot Manager, which means you're missing a bunch of security fixes in Boot Manager. So you will continue to boot just with degraded security.
Yeah, and just to go a little further there, you'll continue to boot. You'll also continue to take updates. The LCU will still install on the device. But as Scott alluded to, we will not be able to service some of the boot critical binaries, and so we will not be able to secure potentially Boot Manager and other boot critical binaries.
Okay, next question. What is the timeline of assisted controlled feature rollout update? Are you planning to roll out the Secure Boot Cert update to 100% of the devices before June 2026? Or should we already prepare the alternative ways to update the devices, registry, GPO, or Intune policy?
The plan by June is to be very close to 100%. Unfortunately, we will never be able to be at 100% because of known devices that we are aware of, that if we push the firmware update, if we push the cert update, the firmware will have issues. But the plan is most certainly for us to have opened up CFR for the vast majority of devices out there by that time frame, yes. Should you prepare alternative ways? I think the answer there is yes as well. CFR is obviously a great way to for us to get confidence so that we can try and update as many devices as possible. But while the 2011 cert is still secure, is a great time for you to start testing the 2023 cert and making sure it works in your environment before it expires, and we have to ship an update that leaves you with vulnerable devices in your network.
One thing I'll add to that is, while we get a lot of data on client devices, the place where we don't get nearly as much data, and it's a place where you should focus, is servers, especially IoT devices, things like that aren't typically providing a lot of telemetry to Microsoft. So those are the ones that you can't count on control feature rollout or the ability to get those updates. So I would focus on those devices and make sure that those devices are getting updated.
The one other thing I'd add is disconnected devices, air gap devices that are not on the network. We absolutely can never see anything from those. So yeah, make sure you're paying attention to all those nooks and crannies of the network.
Okay, so seeing some devices running on Hyper-V with the March 2026 updates applied. Some server 2019 servers show updated but capable equals 0. Other servers 2019 same build, same patch levels show update capable 2. Is this expected behavior that this status is different between these two VMs? So this is the update. It's the 2023 capable registry key, which is one that I don't recommend using, but I mean, you can use it. It says essentially that the 2023 cert for the boot manager is applied and the boot manager has been applied. It doesn't talk about the KEK or the third-party certs. I was looking into this last night, and it looks like in some cases you will that registry is not being updated on Server 2019. I think what I heard this morning was that starting in April it will get set, but I don't think you need to rely on that. You can rely on the other registry keys that we've documented and the events. That particular registry key was a legacy key that we had for an older effort that we were doing. Okay, so next question. What would be the impact of blanketly applying the policy settings, enable Secure Boot Certificate Updates? So I think the thing that the reason why we're here is because we're concerned about you know, the firmware on a device operating correctly and updating the certificates correctly, and we just have no way to thoroughly test the millions of devices out there in the world, and so why we're asking people to be, you know, to monitor and deploy in the way we are is to test the devices that you have and make sure that the firmware is going to work correctly. And in the vast majority of the cases, that's true, but we have seen some cases where there are issues, and we just want to make sure that you don't lose productivity by blanketly deploying across all your devices. If you've done some testing, that's fine. Are these updates Bitlocker aware? Do we need to suspend Bitlocker for 2 to 3 reboots during the process?
They are.
So the updates are Bitlocker aware. You do not need to suspend Bitlocker. The update process reseals the keys for Bitlocker and VSM. So the things that are protected to virtual secure mode, like Windows Hello, would not be protected even with Bitlocker suspended. So the process does take care of resealing all those keys without suspending and without losing security protection across the updates. So just FYI for everybody, we had a little bit of a windstorm last night, so some of us are on some funky internet connections, and some of our stuff is a little slow, and you might see a little bit of glitching, but
yeah, I'm on Starlink right now, and it does glitch every now and again, so apologies for that. Okay,
another question. We successfully updated some of our devices with the 2023 cert and tested how PXE-boot in SCCM would work. PXE-boot worked fine when both 2011 and 2023 certs were enabled, which makes sense. And after revoking the 2011 cert, did not work since the boot.wim doesn't contain the 2023 cert. A couple of questions. Will the boot.wim naturally get the 2023 cert if we keep SCCM Windows SDK up to date? Once we pass June 2026, will devices that didn't successfully get the 2023 cert yet still be able to PXE-boot? And then the third question is, will the 2011-2023 cert be able to live side by side in the boot.wim?
I will say we are getting a lot longer questions this AMA
That's
than
right.
some of the previous ones, but this is great. This is great that we're getting into more detailed stuff. So yes, great question. Eventually the boot.wim will get the 2023 cert. It hasn't yet because of the compatibility issues, and we're worried about that rollout not being not being far enough along that we should switch that by default, because switching that by default would likely break more customers at this point. But at some point, we will absolutely have to do that, because we won't be able to sign current boot managers with the 2011 cert. Once we pass June 2026, devices that didn't get this 2023 cert will still be able to PXE boot. The answer, well, let me answer the third question first. PXE can only offer one boot manager. So the PXE protocol only allows sending a single boot application to the device. The way the PXE server works, it grabs the boot manager out of boot.wim and sends it to the device. But it can only pick one thing. So even if we could put two versions of boot manager signed with both certificates into the boot.wim, the PXE protocol can only send one boot manager. So the real answer to your question is no, they can't live side by side. So back to question 2, will devices that didn't get the cert be able to PXE boot? If you're fully up to date and boot.wim is handing out a 2023 signed boot manager, then no, devices that did not get the 2023 cert will not be able to PXE boot. If you haven't updated the boot.wim on your PXE server, then you'll still be offering a 2011 signed boot manager. And by monitoring the state of your rollout, you can manage that and figure out when is the right time to transition. And one other thing to bring up, I know we've talked about this a while already, boot.wim is a file that you can actually edit. So with the DISM tools in Windows, you can mount boot.wim and replace the boot manager in there, which whichever signed version of boot manager you want. So if your system is totally up to date, I was just reading a report from one of our execs who met with a customer and said, yay, we updated all of our machines. So I know some customers are already fully up to date with a 2023 cert. You can go ahead and switch the boot manager in your boot.wim ahead of time. So that's something that you can do now. Yeah, I think I got to all 3 questions. So
yeah, but obviously if you do that, then you need to make sure every single device has the 2023 certs, because any device that doesn't will not be able to PXE boot.
Yep.
Okay, so next question. How can we get a compliance report if we do not use AutoPatch?
So, I mean, obviously, being in Microsoft, we're very familiar with the Microsoft tools, Intune, AutoPatch, etc. Our expectation is that other solutions that provide similar functionality will also provide some sort of dashboard of their own. So I would ask whoever your vendor is for that solution that you're using. And of course, the other option is to use the PowerShell scripts or the events that we have and build your own dashboard. But I would first, like I said, I would first ask your vendors if they are going to provide similar functionality to what Intune and AutoPatch provide.
I did talk to one customer where they said they had 400,000 to 500,000 desktop or client devices, and they wrote a PowerShell script, deployed that, and then gathered all that data and put it into Power BI. So, or whatever reporting tool that you want, and that worked pretty well for them. So I think there's a lot of options out there. Next question: how can we get a compliant? Oh, sorry. Next question: what is the time frame for the cert to upgrade if we leave the LCU to do the job based on a high confidence level, compared to enabling the CFR settings?
So the high confidence buckets that go into the LCU certainly lag the CFR. But the way the CFR works is we do up to, there's no fixed percentage, but up to a certain percentage of the way through the rollout, through the controlled feature rollout, and then it gets into high confidence. So just counting on CFR is not likely to get you to 100% of even each device bucket. So the time frame will be a little bit longer waiting for LCU, but if you're looking at an entire fleet wide, you pretty much have to do that if you're counting on our automatic update systems. If you are controlling the rollout yourself and setting the registry key using other management tools to set the registry key and enable the update, and you've already done testing, you can go ahead and do that now. You don't need to wait for our models. But if you do wait for our models, you can wait for the LCU high confidence, but that's taking a little bit longer. Those are lagging behind.
Yeah, I think it's accelerating those. So I would expect that the April release would actually have quite a bit more devices in it. So the early part of it has been being very cautious and ensuring that the devices are updating correctly, and then as we get further into it, the number of devices that we update accelerates, and so I would expect to see the same thing happen in the high confidence data as well.
Yeah, and what's key there is that it's not a fixed timeline, right? It's very device specific. I've said this previously in previous AMAs, but the more your device is present out there, like it's a very standard, say, Surface device, there's a lot of them. Those tend to find their way into high confidence faster because we have a lot more of them to send CFR and for it to respond back. It's very unique kind of custom devices, custom firmware. Those kinds of devices will take longer to go through CFR and end up in the LCU, and they may never end up in the LCU. So that's why we've always said, if any devices you have that are special, you should pay extra attention to those devices.
Okay, next question. How important is it that the system already boots trusting the 2023 cert instead of the 2011 cert? Is it okay for the system to continue booting using the 2011 cert as long as the 2023 KEK and DB certificates install? So I think this is asking really about the boot manager that it's using.
Yep.
And I mean, this is kind of a journey, really, in the sense that the goal here is to get the certificates into the firmware. That's the key first step. The boot manager, is certainly a next step, and getting all your devices in that state so they're fully updated. Then it's really about updating all your media, like so that back on the Pixie Boot discussion and or other types of media that you use in your environment, updating that to the 2023 boot manager, and then the final step is really about revoking or untrusting the 2011 certificate and applying the SVN. But I think you want to be deliberate about those steps and know where you are in that sequence.
But to be really clear, to add one thing onto that, it is critical that your devices are booting with the 2023 certificate before the existing certificates expire. So come October, we won't be able to sign a new boot manager with the 2011 certificate. So you will be you will not be getting security updates in boot manager if your devices are not booting through the 2023 certificate. Now, and that should happen automatically. So as soon as the 2023 DB certificate is there, Windows will automatically install the 2023 boot manager. If you're booting through Pixie Boot, where you control the boot manager separately, or you have some other complicated multi-boot scenario or something like that, then you may have to do something manual there. But it is critical that you are booting through the newer boot manager in order to know that you're getting the security updates.
Okay, so as a reminder, you can post your questions on AKA MS AMA Secure Boot. So that's aka.ms AMA Secure Boot. So next question. I have deployed the Secure Boot remediations through Intune. I see event ID 1801 that says the certificates are available but not applied, and the bucket confidence level shows needs more data. Do I need to take any action on that? I think so. If you're getting an 1801, that means that the system thinks that there's still something to update, and it could be the boot manager in this case. If all the certificates have been applied, then it may be that. And something to recognize is that when you say apply certificates to the device, the certificates will actually apply without needing a reboot. But there's cases where to apply the boot manager, it does need a reboot so that it can ensure that BitLocker and VSM are sealed correctly. So it may be just that the reboot hasn't happened, and probably the easiest way to figure that out is to look for the other events in the event log to see what exactly it's saying. Like you might see an 1800 event that says needs reboot. So.
This one specifically said that the certificates are available but not applied.
And it's because the bucket confidence level, right? It hasn't reached the LCU confidence.
So I would add to that watch this. So you'll get that event more than once. The buckets continue to gain more confidence data as we're continuing through the rollout. If it stays that way, then you may need to take some action. And if you have a number of those devices in your ecosystem, you may need to do some testing on your own. Like Arden mentioned before, devices that we haven't seen a lot of, we may not have enough data to be able to make a call on some classes of devices. So you may need to take some action, take one device, take it out of rotation, do some testing on that device, try the update, see if it works or has any problems. If your testing says it's fine, then you can push the registry key to cause that to do the update, even if our public confidence data doesn't have enough information to trigger that device category.
And then I think in this case, it's saying they've deployed using Intunes. So if they've actually told the device to update.
Oh, I missed that part.
No, well, but I think you made some good points there about if they haven't updated. But the events I think will be very good at telling you how far it got. So it's the system event log and it's the TPM WMI event source. And if you look through there, you can see the activity that it's had. So each step that it takes, it logs an event to say it was successful or not. So next question. Looks like there have been reports online of users receiving driver updates that are requiring BitLocker keys to be entered after reboot. Is this expected behavior? If the certs were already installed via policy, still get prompted for driver updates. Is there a way to know what driver updates in Intune actually have the drivers? I'm going to read this again. Is there a way to know what driver updates in Intune actually have the driver that potentially can cause BitLocker keys to be entered? Naming conventions in Intune for drivers are a bit difficult to decipher.
I'm not sure what driver updates that would be. I'm wondering if firmware updates are showing up as driver updates in Intune. So in general, a driver update should not require the certificates, because the certificates that control secure boot are only about the boot applications. Drivers aren't verified until boot start drivers are verified in WinLoad. The rest of the drivers are verified in Windows, and the signatures on those drivers is independent of the boot configuration. But firmware updates, specifically some firmware updates that are updating because of PK issues, which are issues with the KEK update, do change the BitLocker key ceiling, and in some cases they should not require you to re-enter the BitLocker key, but in some cases I can imagine that they might. And those firmware updates are deployed through Windows Update, and I'm not positive, but maybe those show up as driver updates from Intune. So I think maybe we need an Intune expert on the next AMA to help.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get all the Intune specific questions answered afterwards on the website. So keep an eye out for that. We are taking note, and we will get the right experts to answer the questions.
Okay, next question. I noticed that some of my clients, around 5% so far, updated only 2 of the 3 Secure Boot certificates. Intune Remediation scripts show the following output. Microsoft UEFI CA 2023 equals false. Microsoft Corporation UEFI CA 2011 equals true. 2 other certificates are showing 2023 data strings. Is it expected that not all certificates are updated at the same time?
So that's possible. The certificate that's showing false there. So the naming of the certificates is a little bit confusing. There's one is called the Windows UEFI CA 2023, and the other one is called Microsoft UEFI CA 2023. The Windows one is the one that signs Boot Manager. That's the critical one to make sure you're getting Boot Manager updates. The Microsoft UEFI CA is the one that signs third-party components, which may not be applicable on all devices. I'm not sure what is this output coming from Intune? Yeah, this is coming from Intune. So I'm not sure what Intune is expecting here, but for devices that never had the 2011 UEFI CA, we do not automatically install the 2023 UEFI CA. So there is a class of devices called Secure Core PC devices that do not have the 2011 UEFI CA installed. And on those devices or any other device where the 2011 UEFI CA isn't present, we will not install the 2023 UEFI CA, trying to keep the same security posture on those devices.
But when I'm reading this, I think what it's saying is that the third party, the Microsoft Corporation UEFI CA 2011 is there, but the 2023 one isn't there. And I don't know why that would happen. I think Scott's point is good that we intentionally don't apply the new third-party certificates if the old third-party certificate is there. But in this case, it seems like what it's saying is that it's not there. The new one is not there.
I read the question too quickly. I think early on in the rollout, we were doing the certificates separately, and we were pushing the Windows UEFI CA certificate out separately. But it's been months that we've been doing them all together.
Right.
So
yeah, it would be interesting to see what the Windows CA version show on the same script.
Yeah. Okay, so new question. Will Microsoft release an OS upgrade that requires the EFI partition to be signed with a 2023 certificate? If so, is this expected in the Windows 11 feature update later this year? And has Microsoft announced anything about this? We want to avoid upgrading devices if it will re-sign the EFI partition before the new certificates are installed.
So a little terminology. So the EFI partition itself is a file system partition. It's a FAT file system partition. There is no signature on the whole partition. The individual files that live in that partition are signed. And the most important one that we're worried about is Boot Manager. That's the primary boot binary for Windows that lives on the EFI partition. So I think what you're referring to here is the signature on bootmgfw.efi that lives in the EFI Microsoft boot directory. That's the primary thing on the EFI partition that matters. And when we've been talking about deploying Boot Manager, That's what we're talking about, is the update of that file. So the way the update works is, first all the certificates get installed. When the system sees that the 2023 Windows UEFI CA has been installed, then the system will automatically install the 2023 signed boot manager. So no, the system will not start deploying 2023 signed boot manager on systems that don't have the new the Windows UEFI CA 2023. So the system will on purpose not update something that we think will cause your system not to boot. We'd prefer you to be in a security degraded situation that still boots, rather than a situation that will cause the machine to not boot. So all the updates.
Yeah, and the specific part about the OS upgrade.
Go ahead, Richard.
No, I was just going to say, sorry, Scott. But the part about the OS upgrade requiring it, the one that's coming later this year will be delivered through LCU, so it will just behave like any other LCU update. But there will be future potential versions of Windows that will be a full OS upgrade that may require 2023 certs. So.
But the same thing will apply. We won't upgrade. So that upgrade, if it requires that cert and your system doesn't have it, the upgrade should fail. So we will on purpose not upgrade a machine. If you're doing an install through some other mechanism, like applying a full disk image to a machine, obviously you can do things another way, but Windows will not upgrade something that we think won't boot.
Yeah. I think the key here is getting up to date is important, first for security reasons, and then eventually it's just that things are going to start relying on these new certificates, like third-party software that has third-party firmware, things like that. So eventually it could cause you problems. We're doing everything we can to ensure that the path is solid, but getting these certificates updated will put you in a better situation. Next question. Can Secure Boot certificates be updated when Secure Boot is disabled? Microsoft's available updates process errors out unless Secure Boot is enabled. If a device won't boot Windows with Secure Boot on, how can we bring it into compliance?
So yes, we don't update the Secure Boot certificates if Secure Boot is disabled. The reasoning for that is this is an inconsistency among UEFI implementations. Some UEFI implementations will be able to update certificates even if Secure Boot is disabled. Some systems will not, and it won't work correctly. Some systems, when you go to enable Secure Boot, will change the certificates at that point. So that there is a lot of variability in the UEFI ecosystem there. The specs are not entirely clear about what the behavior is supposed to be. So the question about compliance is a good one. Compliant, I don't know that we have a single definition of compliant. With Secure Boot off, would the device be considered compliant today with Secure Boot off? I think I would argue that you probably should not be compliant with that policy if that policy requires updated Secure Boot certificates if Secure Boot were off. If the thing you're saying there about Windows won't boot Windows with Secure Boot on is likely a configuration issue. And there are a number of steps, a number of things that have to be right in order for Secure Boot to work on a Windows system. There is actually quite a lot of information on the internet about enabling Secure Boot, ironically, because a bunch of the gaming companies have started requiring Secure Boot for games to run. Modern games are typically requiring secure boot. So a bunch of the game companies have good advice about multi-steps, things you can check to get your system to be able to boot with secure boot on. But yeah, that would be my recommendation is work through those issues and figure out what are the steps you need to take to make the system boot with secure boot.
I wonder if the question there, Scott, is also related to, I have a device, I have Secure Boot turned off. I know it has 2011 certs, right? I want to turn Secure Boot on, and I'm concerned that if I turn Secure Boot on, it won't boot because my device has a 2023 bootloader and I don't yet have the 2023 certs. And what would the flow there be, right?
Yeah, that is a great question.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, you take it, Arden.
Well, this is where I put in a plug for a doc that hasn't been published, but is coming soon, which is the troubleshooting doc. And in there, it talks about the Secure Boot recovery tool that if you're booting from the 2023 boot manager and you turn Secure Boot on, but you don't have the certificate for that boot manager, there's a EFI tool that you can put on a thumb drive and plug it in and boot from that, and it'll push the certificate into the firmware when Secure Boot's on. So the troubleshooting guide should be out, I'm hoping this week, if not early next week. And this is where I remind you to look at aka.ms, get Secure Boot for latest updates and new tools and guides. So we're updating that regularly. If there's adding new content, we've added some Intune tools or like how-tos. I think there's some scripting that's coming sometime soon. So yeah, keep looking there. There's a announcements page there that also shows what's new, and then all the pages on that site have change logs, so you can see what's changing on the pages.
But I think for now, the key is you would have to boot an OS that has the 2011 bootloader with Secure Boot turned on, then allow that OS to put the new certs into the device, and then essentially mimic what our recovery tool is going to be doing.
Yeah. Okay, next question. Does Windows Server 2025 automatically comply both fresh installs and Server 2022 upgrade? I think
automatically comply as in install the certificates, right? I mean, it uses the same compliance DB as all the other versions of Windows, and I do not believe it has any additional compliance capability above of what Server 2022 has. It's, in that regard, it's getting the same confidence DB in the LCU. So no, I don't think it automatically complies in a way that's different to Server 2022.
Yeah, I think you're right. You can look at it as Windows images have those certificates on the disk. But what we're really talking about is once you're running that Windows image, you still need to tell it to apply those certificates into the firmware. Once they get into the firmware, upgrading leaves them in the firmware, but you still have to take that step.
And we'd redirect you to aka.ms/secureboot for server, which has additional information on server. Server doesn't participate in CFR, so is not going to get automatically handled the same way client will, and frequently manual action is needed for servers. So please check that aka.ms/secureboot for server for more details.
Okay, so a follow-up question on an earlier config manager boot.wim question. Will devices that have 2023 certs already require a boot.wim that has the 2023 cert once the June 2026 date is passed?
So what certificates are in the device, what boot manager will boot on a device is dependent on what certificates are installed. Once the certificate, so whether it requires the 2023 cert in boot.wim is about whether the device still has the 2011 cert trusted. So there are new devices being shipped today that have only the 2023 cert and not the 2011 cert. So those devices require that 2023 signed boot.wim is present. That is a relatively small population. Most devices that are shipping today have both 2011 and 2023. But there's nothing magical about the date in June that will cause it to need that. It's about what certificates are installed on all the machines and what boot.wim you have. So it's really a management question there.
Yeah, I think to reinforce that the June date is really about ensuring that you continue to get security updates. That it doesn't really change any of your processes in terms of getting up to date. So, next question: how long will the 2023 certs last? Will this process need to be repeated when that happens?
They last for 10 years, I believe, Scott, correct?
It's something like that. So the 2023 certificates last until the expiry of the root certificate that issued them, which I believe is 2035?
2038.
2038. So certainly we will need to replace those at some point. It will be shorter than the 15 years we got out of the initial certificates, but coming sooner than that, and this is a very unrelated topic, but related to your question, the post-quantum mandate is taking effect in 2030, which means I think more likely we're going to see new systems coming online, and post-quantum really won't be about legacy hardware. So legacy hardware will continue to use these 2023 certificates, but new hardware will start using post-quantum certificates starting in the next couple of years. And so there will be more certificate action. Apologies. And this situation does get more complex once we have 2011 certs, 2023 certs, and post-quantum certs. And
but I wonder if that's really going to, that might actually make it easier in a sense that any devices that are running right now with these 2023 certs, if they last 10 years, then that's going to be when the issue comes up. But then all the new devices that come out that have the post-quantum, I would expect that those last longer. We'll see.
One would hope.
Okay. We'll all wait with bated breath.
Hopefully we'll be retired by then.
At least one of us will be. I manually updated the registry on a device, set it to 22852, and forced the scheduled task to start. Waited 30 seconds and forced a reboot. And the server 2019 VM on Hyper-V with the latest March updates, and it restarted several more times on its own before it settled down and showed updated. Will server reboots be required every time, or was this me forcing things to run the scheduled task that had the effect? There
are multiple reboots required for the process of updating the certificates. But that is the one-off to update the certificates. Once the certificates are updated, you won't see this multiple reboots anymore. But because this is an operation of putting something into the firmware, you have to put it into the firmware and then allow the firmware to apply the updated certs, and then allow the firmware to boot the new bootloader that's signed with the new cert. So yeah, there are a few reboots in the process. Most of the time in the automated flow, it's not as noticeable to the user because the reboot happens really early in the boot process. So you may not even notice what looks like multiple
Oh, looks like Richard's having a little bit of internet trouble.
Let me add one more thing. I've been seeing this note. So there was an issue with Hyper-V, guests on Hyper-V updating the KEK on long-running VMs. And a fix came out in March to address that issue. And you can think of it as a two-part fix. One is you have to apply the updates to the Hyper-V server, and that addresses the ability to update the KEK. And then you need to update the guests so that there's a Hyper-V PK signed KEK on the guest that can apply to the server. So the marked updates for people using Hyper-V is useful, but you have to apply them to both sides, the host and the guest. Okay, next question. In the March 2026 release notes, it says this: with this update, Windows Quality Updates includes additional high confidence device targeting data, increasing coverage on devices eligible to automatically receive new Secure Boot certificates. Devices receive the new certificates only after demonstrating sufficient successful update signals, maintaining a controlled phased rollout. Can you tell us more about this? My guess is that you need diagnostic data on to have this nice feature support. So, okay, plug for, there's a new page on our Get Secure Boot site that talks about the high confidence data. And so it'll give you a bit more insight into that. That feature is on by default, so you don't have to do anything to make that feature work. It does, in the end, it does rely on diagnostic data that we get from the entire Windows ecosystem. So in the beginning of that, that's where that data comes from, is us seeing that devices are successfully updating.
Right. I mean, you don't necessarily need to have diagnostic data that you're uploading. If your device is kind of fairly generic, then other people out there will be sending us the data, and then we will use that to build the high confidence bucket database. And your device will then get the update through the LCU without having to send us data.
But if your device is unique,
right?
If you have, say, a custom build from an OEM, or a very old device, or a device that's not very popular, or you built it yourself out of parts, you may want to turn on diagnostic data to help us get enough data to trigger the update.
So next question: how will Windows Update behavior change post-expiration on devices that haven't trusted the 2023 keys? Will they continue to install LCUs normally, except for boot critical components, or fail to take LCUs altogether? Will this be messaged? To user admins somehow, Defender perhaps? Will this prevent milestone updates? Well, there's a lot of questions in there.
Yeah, I mean, the part about, I talked about this earlier, LCUs will continue to install. They will not fail to install. And you're correct, they'll install, but they won't update some. They may not update certain boot critical binaries. Will it be messaged? We are definitely working on messaging in the operating system for this. I won't get into too many specifics now because some of it's still being implemented. Of course, we do have some messaging that's already there, the events and things that we've already talked about. And we do expect Defender and others to alert to this as well using those events. Will it prevent milestone updates? We do not foresee it preventing milestone updates, no.
Scott?
No, I was just gonna get to that last part of the question, but Richard got to it. So same answer.
So it looks like the last question. Thanks everyone for joining this AMA, and look forward to another one that we're having in April.
Hopefully with a more solid internet connection. Yep. Thanks everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks.